Everyone feared the millionaire's wife, known for destroying anyone with words. On an ordinary night, she chooses the wrong person to humiliate in front of everyone. Pushed to the limit, someone finally decides not to remain silent. And what happens in that instant completely changes the course of that story. If this beautiful story of overcoming and love interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching us from. Continuing. The night in São Paulo had that characteristic Friday movement when the city seemed to pulse with a different energy. In the Jardins neighborhood, between wide avenues and illuminated buildings, the Le Jardin restaurant stood out as one of the most exclusive in the São Paulo capital. Its discreet facade hid a luxurious interior, where crystal chandeliers reflected soft light over tables covered with imported linen cloths. There, businessmen closed deals, celebrities dined in reserved corners, and traditional families maintained rituals that spanned generations. For those who worked at Le Jardin, every night was a carefully choreographed dance. Waiters glided between tables with surgical precision, sommeliers presented rare labels with almost religious reverence, and in the kitchen, the chef led his team like a maestro before an orchestra. But on that specific Friday, a different tension hung in the air. Carlos, the manager, had spent the entire afternoon gathering the team, reinforcing protocols that everyone already knew by heart. Helena Vasconcelos was on the reservation list. The name alone was enough to alter the dynamics of the restaurant. Wife of Rodrigo Vasconcelos, one of the most influential businessmen in the country, Helena had built her own reputation over the years, not as the woman who stayed in the shadow of her powerful husband, but as someone who carried her own authority, feared and respected in circles where few had access. Her presence in any environment was like a sudden change in temperature. Conversations stopped, postures stiffened, smiles became protocol. Carlos knew that dynamic well. He had worked at Le Jardin for almost 15 years and had learned that certain clients demanded not just excellence, but absolute perfection. Helena was one of those cases. She did not tolerate failures, did not accept excuses, and had a gaze that seemed to X-ray every detail of everything around her. More than one employee had already left the restaurant in tears after one of her visits, and stories about her cutting comments circulated like warning legends. While the team prepared in the back of the restaurant, away from the lights and glamour, Joana Silva tried to understand the instructions she had received from Marcia, the cleaning supervisor. It was her third day at Le Jardin, and everything still seemed too strange, too distant from the reality she knew. At 32, Joana carried a story marked by difficult choices and tortuous paths. Raised in the east zone of São Paulo, daughter of a seamstress and a bricklayer who worked from sunup to sundown, she had learned early on that life gave nothing for free. She had studied until high school, dreamed of college, but financial reality had always spoken louder. She married young, had a daughter, and separated a few years later. Now, she lived with her mother and little Isabella in a simple house in Itaquera, where every bill at the end of the month was a silent battle. The job at Le Jardin, obtained through an acquaintance, seemed like a blessing. It paid better than other options, had a formal contract and benefits. But it also had rules that Joana was still learning to navigate. That world of crystals, expensive wines and dishes whose names she could barely pronounce was completely foreign. Marcia, a woman in her 50s with hair tied in a tight bun, spoke too fast, gestured impatiently, and clearly had no time to repeat instructions. Joana noted everything mentally, trying to memorize every detail about which products to use on which surfaces, how to move without being noticed, when to appear and when to disappear. That night, however, there was something different in the air. Marcia was even more tense than usual. Other employees whispered among themselves, and Carlos walked through the corridors like a general inspecting troops before battle. Joana didn't understand exactly why, but she felt that something important was about to happen. That was when Marcia called her with a sharp hand gesture. The woman had a stern face, that expression that left no room for questions. "Today you will work in the main hall. I need you to stay alert, discreet, and for God's sake don't draw attention. There is a very important client coming for dinner, and everything needs to be impeccable." Joana nodded, swallowing the anxiety that was beginning to tighten her stomach. Working in the main hall meant being exposed, visible to the clients. Until then, She had been restricted to the service corridors, the bathrooms, the areas where no one important would see her. Now she would need to circulate among those elegant tables, among people who probably spent on one dinner the equivalent of her entire month's salary. At 8:15 in the evening, Helena Vasconcelos arrived at Le Jardin. Joanna was at the back of the hall, discreetly picking up linen napkins that had fallen from a table, when she saw her enter. It wasn't hard to identify her. The woman had that presence that some call an aura, others call power. It wasn't just the impeccable clothes, the precisely cut navy blue dress that certainly cost a fortune, nor the discreet but obviously valuable jewelry. It was something more subtle and more absolute at the same time. The way she moved, how she looked around, how the air around her seemed to reorganize itself to accommodate her. Carlos appeared like a reflex, a professional smile on his face, a reverent but not servile posture. Helena greeted him with a minimal nod, and the manager led her to her usual table, strategically positioned to offer a view of the entire hall, but protected from too direct looks. Her husband had not yet arrived, but that was common. Rodrigo Vasconcelos lived trapped in meetings that stretched on, urgent phone calls, decisions that could not wait. Helena sat down with precise movements, accepted the menu but barely looked at it. Joanna, on the other side of the hall, pretended to be busy organizing the flowers on a sideboard, but watched out of the corner of her eye. There was something fascinating and terrifying about that woman. She emanated absolute control, as if every detail of the world around her existed only because she allowed it. The minutes dragged on. Helena ordered sparkling water, examined the crystal glass against the light before drinking, then turned her attention back to her cell phone. Joanna took the opportunity to move discreetly through the hall, always alert, always trying to be invisible, as Marcia had taught. She picked up non-existent crumbs, adjusted chairs that didn't need adjustment, all to look busy without actually interfering in the environment. That was when it happened. A sudden movement, a misstep, and Joanna's foot tripped on the leg of her own uniform pants, which were a size too large for her. The sound wasn't loud, but it was enough. Her tray with a few clean napkins wobbled. She lost her balance and, for a terrifying second, thought she was going to fall. She managed to balance herself at the last instant, but the muffled noise of her shoes against the floor had already done the damage. Helena looked up from her cell phone. The gaze she directed at Joanna was like an X-ray that pierced not only her body but her entire life story. It was a look that measured, weighed, judged, and discarded in fractions of a second. Joanna felt the blood rush to her face, embarrassment burning her skin. She wanted to apologize, to explain, but the words died in her throat. Helena continued looking for a few more seconds, then turned her attention back to her cell phone, as if Joanna simply no longer existed. Carlos appeared beside Joanna almost instantly, his face tense. With a discreet gesture, he indicated that she should return to the back. Joanna obeyed, her legs trembling, her heart racing. As she walked away, she heard Helena's voice, clear and cold as crystal. "Carlos, that new employee. Make sure she knows how to move properly. This isn't a neighborhood grocery store." The sentence was spoken in a low volume, but not so low that Joanna couldn't hear. And that, she realized, was exactly the point. Helena wanted her to hear. She wanted everyone to hear. It wasn't just an observation about professional competence. It was a demarcation of territory, a reminder of who was in charge, of who had the power to judge, of who could diminish someone with a few words. Joanna reached the back of the restaurant with her hands shaking. Marcia was there, arms crossed, her face set in a mixture of disappointment and irritation. She didn't need to say anything. Joanna knew she had failed the test, that little stumble could cost more than just a moment of shame. But as she tried to pull herself together, breathing deeply and holding back the tears that threatened to come, something began to form inside her. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something more complex, a mixture of humiliation, indignation, and a question that refused to be silenced. Why did someone think they had the right to treat another human being that way? Why did money, social position, and power give Helena Vasconcelos the right to make Joanna feel so small? Those questions would stay with her, and very soon they would have answers that no one could predict. The following days at Le Jardin were a mixture of constant tension and small silent victories. Joanna had decided she would make no more mistakes, that she would be the most discreet, most efficient, most invisible employee that restaurant had ever seen. She arrived 15 minutes early, reviewed every task 3 times and moved with calculated care. Marcia noticed the change and seemed to approve with a minimal nod, but Joanna knew the real test was yet to come. Helena Vasconcelos had the habit of dining at Le Jardin at least twice a week, sometimes with her husband, other times alone, occasionally accompanied by friends who were equally elegant and equally distant. Joanna had learned to recognize the signs of her imminent arrival. Carlos became even more alert. The waiters adjusted their postures, and even the chef in the kitchen seemed to raise the already impossible standard of his dishes. On that Tuesday, when Helena entered the restaurant, Joanna was in the middle of the hall, adjusting the flowers on a table that had just been vacated. She felt the change in the air even before seeing her. It was as if the temperature dropped a few degrees, as if time itself reorganized itself around that woman. Helena wore an immaculate white outfit that probably cost more than Joanna earned in 6 months. Her dark hair was pulled back into an impeccable low bun, and her sunglasses remained on her face even inside the controlled light environment. She walked to her usual table with that confidence that comes from never having been contradicted, never having heard a no that really mattered. This time she was accompanied by 2 friends, middle-aged women who were equally elegant and equally distant. Joanna recognized one of them from the magazines her mother sometimes flipped through at the beauty salon. Women from that world where everything was possible, where problems were solved with a phone call, where the word difficulty simply didn't exist in the vocabulary. Joanna finished arranging the flowers quickly and began to walk away, but Helena's voice reached her like an invisible whip. "You, the cleaning girl." Joanna stopped, her heart racing. She turned slowly, trying to maintain her composure. Helena was watching her over her sunglasses, which now rested on the tip of her nose. Those dark eyes examined Joanna with the same attention someone would dedicate to an interesting but potentially annoying insect. "Yes, ma'am?" Joanna's voice came out firmer than she expected, and for a second she saw something pass over Helena's face. Surprise? Irritation? It was too fast to identify. "These flowers are wilted. How did you not notice something so obvious?" Joanna looked at the arrangement she had just adjusted. The flowers were fresh, vibrant, clearly changed that very morning. They were white lilies and pink roses, still with water droplets on the petals. There was nothing wilted about them. "I'm sorry, Mom, but the flowers were changed this morning. They are fresh." The words came out before Joanna could censor them. It was just the truth, spoken in a respectful tone, but the moment they left her mouth, she realized the mistake. Helena was not interested in the truth. She was interested in being obeyed. The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Helena's 2 friends exchanged uncomfortable looks. A waiter passing nearby slowed his pace, clearly trying to decide if he should intervene. Carlos appeared in Joanna's field of vision, his face pale. Helena took off her sunglasses completely, folding them with slow and deliberate movements. Her eyes fixed on Joanna with an intensity that made the room temperature seem even lower. "I said they are wilted. Are you contradicting me?" The question wasn't really a question. It was a test, a trap. Joanna understood that, but she also understood that any answer would be wrong. If she agreed, she would be lying. If she maintained her position, she would be challenging someone who clearly did not accept challenges. "I only meant that—" "I'm not interested in what you meant. I'm interested in you learning your place. Remove these flowers and bring others immediately." The word place echoed in the air like a sentence. Joanna felt her blood boil but kept her face neutral. She picked up the vase carefully and walked away, her eyes burning but dry. She would not give Helena the satisfaction of seeing her cry. In the back of the restaurant, Marcia was waiting for her with a severe expression. "What did you do?" "Nothing. She said the flowers were wilted." I tried to explain that they weren't. Marcia closed her eyes, breathing deeply as if asking heaven for patience. "Joanna, you need to understand. Clients like Mrs. Vasconcelos don't want explanations. They want obedience. That's how it works. But the flowers weren't wilted. It was a lie." "So what? Do you think the truth matters here? Do you think your pride is worth more than your job?" Joanna didn't answer. She swapped the flowers for an identical arrangement and returned to the hall, placing the new vase on the table with careful movements. Helena didn't even look at her. She continued talking to her friends as if Joanna were part of the furniture. But that was only the beginning. In the following weeks, whenever Helena came to the restaurant, she found something wrong. The table wasn't exactly how she wanted it. The air conditioning was too strong or too weak. The bathroom, which Joanna had cleaned minutes before, was dirty. Each visit turned into a series of small humiliations, always public, always calculated to remind Joanna of her place. The other employees began to avoid her, as if bad luck were contagious. Joanna understood. No one wanted to draw Helena's attention. No one wanted to be the next target. But that made everything lonelier, harder to endure. It was on a Friday night, 3 weeks after the first incident, that everything changed. The restaurant was especially full. It was the birthday of someone important at a table in the center of the hall, and the environment had that festive energy that contrasted with the usual tension. Helena was at her table, accompanied only by her husband this time. Rodrigo Vasconcelos was a tall man, with well-cut grey hair and an impeccable suit. He had that air of someone accustomed to making decisions that affect thousands of lives without losing sleep. Joanna was picking up empty plates from a nearby table when she heard Helena's voice louder than usual. "Carlos, come here immediately." The manager materialized beside the table in seconds, always solicitous, always ready. "What is the problem, Mrs. Vasconcelos?" Helena pointed to the floor beside her chair, where there was a small water stain. "This here, do you see? Someone spilled water and no one cleaned it. It's unacceptable. I could have slipped." The stain was tiny, probably the result of condensation from a glass. Joanna knew it represented no danger, but she also knew what was coming next. Carlos looked around, searching for the person responsible for cleaning that area, and his eyes met Joanna's. "Joanna, please clean this immediately." She took a cloth she carried in her uniform pocket and approached the table. She knelt on the floor, cleaning the non-existent stain while feeling the weight of Helena's gaze upon her. When she finished and began to stand up, the voice came again. "It's not clean, do it right." Joanna looked at the floor. It was impeccable, there was nothing there. But Helena continued looking at her with that expression that mixed disdain and something that seemed almost like amusement, as if she were testing how far she could push, how far Joanna would bend. Something inside Joanna broke. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't explosive. It was silent and deep, like a crack that finally crosses the entire structure of glass that had been pressed for too long. She stood up, holding the cloth in her hands, and looked directly into Helena's eyes. The restaurant continued to be noisy around them, but in that specific bubble around the table, the silence was absolute. "With all due respect, ma'am, the floor is clean." The words were spoken in a calm, firm tone, without aggression but also without submission. Helena blinked, clearly not expecting that. Rodrigo raised his eyes from his plate, interested for the first time in the scene unfolding. "What did you say?" "I said the floor is clean, there is nothing there. You know that as well as I do." The silence now expanded beyond the table. Nearby conversations began to stop. Waiters stopped mid-movement. Carlos turned pale as a ghost. It was as if everyone present felt they were witnessing something rare, something dangerous, something that shouldn't be happening. Helena stood up slowly, and Joanna realized the woman was shorter than her. Even with expensive heels, even with all that imperial posture, Helena had to slightly tilt her chin to look Joanna in the eyes. "Do you have any idea who you are talking to?" "I do. I am talking to a person who thinks money and position give her the right to humiliate those who work honestly. I am talking to someone who turns other people's lives into hell just because she can. And I am saying that it is not right." The entire restaurant was in silence now. Even the background music seemed to have been turned off, although Joanna knew that was impossible. She saw Carlos making desperate signs, saw Marcia appear at the kitchen entrance with a horrified expression, but she couldn't stop. The words that had been trapped for weeks, for years perhaps, finally found a way out. "You have everything. Money, power, influence. But you use all of it to make people like me feel small, and why? What do you gain from it? Does it make you feel bigger? Because I have news, it doesn't. It only shows that underneath all this luxury, there is someone very small indeed." Helena remained absolutely still. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, as if someone had slapped her. Rodrigo had stood up as well but said nothing. The entire restaurant watched, dozens of cell phones discreetly pointed in the direction of that scene. Joanna took a step back, breathing heavily. Only then did she realize what she had done, the scale of what she had just said. But instead of the fear she expected to feel, there was only a strange relief, as if a weight she had carried for years had finally been lifted from her back. Carlos was the first to move, approaching with his hands raised in a pacifying gesture. "Joanna, please come with me." She nodded, but before walking away she looked at Helena one more time. The woman was still there, standing speechless. For the first time since Joanna had met her, Helena Vasconcelos didn't have a ready answer, didn't have a cutting comment, didn't have absolute control of the situation. And that, Joanna realized as she followed Carlos to the back of the restaurant, was more powerful than anything she could have said. Carlos's office was small and impersonal, decorated only with framed certificates and photos of the restaurant at important events. Joanna sat on the hard plastic chair in front of the manager's desk, her hands still shaking slightly from the adrenaline rush. Carlos paced back and forth, running his hand through his hair in a rare display of nervousness. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" His voice came out louder than he intended, and he made a visible effort to control himself. Joanna didn't answer immediately. She knew that anything she said would be inadequate. There was no possible defense for what she had done, not in that context, not in that world where hierarchies were more important than truths. "That is Helena Vasconcelos, Joanna. Helena Vasconcelos, do you understand what that means?" "I understand she is a wealthy woman who treats people with contempt." Carlos stopped pacing and stared at her, incredulous. "I really have no clue, do you? It's not just about being rich, it's about connections, influence, power. Her husband has business with half the restaurants in this city. One word from her can destroy careers, close establishments, and you humiliated her in front of a room full of people." "I didn't humiliate anyone, I only told the truth." "The truth?" Carlos laughed without any humor. "The truth doesn't pay rent, Joanna. The truth doesn't put food on the table. You have a daughter to support, don't you?" The mention of Isabella made something tighten in Joanna's chest. She thought of her 7-year-old daughter, who at that hour was probably already asleep at her grandmother's house, lulled by stories her mother used to tell. Isabella, who needed school supplies, new clothes, a better future than her mother had. "I know I have responsibilities." "Then you should have thought about that before opening your mouth." Silence settled between them, heavy and definitive. Carlos went back behind the desk, sitting down with a tired sigh. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost gentle. "Joanna, I really am sorry. You are a good employee. Dedicated, punctual, hard-working. But I have no choice. I have to let you go. Immediately." The words were not a surprise, but they still hurt. Joanna nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She didn't cry. She refused to cry there, in that office, in front of that man who understood very well what she had done, but didn't have the courage to support her. "I understand. I will pay you for the full month. It's the least I can do. But I need you to collect your things and leave through the back. Now." Joanna stood up, her legs heavy but firm. She took her small bag from the employee locker, where she kept only a few basic belongings. Marcia was there, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. For a moment, Joanna thought the supervisor was going to say something harsh, reproachful. But Marcia only shook her head in a gesture that could mean disapproval or something resembling reluctant respect. "Good luck, girl. You're going to need it." Joanna left through the back of Le Jardin like a criminal, through the service door that opened onto the supplier's alley. The São Paulo night was hot and humid, the air heavy with that characteristic smell of the big city. She walked to the nearest bus stop, still in a state of shock, trying to process what had just happened. It was only when she was sitting on the hard bus seat, watching the city lights pass by the window, that reality began to solidify. She had lost her job. She had no financial reserves. The rent would be due in 2 weeks. Isabella would need new books for the next semester. And she, Joanna Silva, 32 years old, was unemployed because she couldn't stay quiet in the face of injustice. Part of her regretted it. The practical, responsible part. The voice of survival that said she should have just endured, accepted, survived. But there was another part, smaller but growing, that felt something different. Pride, dignity. She didn't know how to name it, but it was real. When she got home, it was already past midnight. Her mother, Donna Celia, was awake in the living room, watching an old soap opera on television. The 60-something woman stood up alarmed when she saw the expression on her daughter's face. What happened? Joanna told her everything. The weeks of humiliation, the confrontation, the dismissal. She expected a lecture, expected to hear that she had been irresponsible, that she had thought only of herself. But Donna Celia only pulled her daughter into a tight hug, one of those she gave when Joanna was a child and came home from school crying. My daughter, you did what was right. Even if it hurts now, you did what was right. And if I can't get another job, and if she uses her influence to hurt me, then we find a way. We always have, haven't we? You are strong, Joanna, stronger than those rich women who never had to truly fight for anything. Joanna wanted to believe that. She really did. What she didn't know was that at that exact moment, while she hugged her mother in the modest living room of her house in Itaquera, her life was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. At Le Jardin, after Joanna's departure, the restaurant had taken a few minutes to return to normal. Helena had remained at her table, silent, distractedly picking at the food she hadn't even touched. Rodrigo had tried to talk to her a few times, but gave up in the face of his wife's icy silence. When they finally left, she didn't say a single word on the way home. But what Helena hadn't realized, what no one had realized in the intensity of that moment, was that the entire scene had been recorded. Multiple cell phones, multiple angles, multiple perspectives of the moment. A humble cleaning lady had faced one of the most powerful women in São Paulo. The first video appeared on Instagram around 11 at night, then on Twitter, then on TikTok, then in WhatsApp groups, Facebook pages, stories that multiplied like dividing cells. The next morning, when Joanna woke up late after a restless night's sleep, the video already had more than 2 million views. She found out when Isabella came running into the bedroom, her grandmother's tablet in her hands. Mommy, you're on the internet. Joanna took the tablet, still trying to wake up completely. The screen showed a video she recognized immediately. It was her at Le Jardin talking to Helena. The angle perfectly captured the expression of shock on the powerful woman's face, the firmness in Joanna's posture, the absolute attention of everyone around. The caption of the video said, "Humble worker confronts billionaire's wife who was humiliating her. This is courage." The comments were in the thousands. Most supported Joanna, calling her a heroine, an example, an inspiration. There were also negative ones, of course, people saying she had been disrespectful, that she didn't know her place, that she deserved to be fired. But those were a minority compared to the tsunami of support. Donna Celia appeared at the bedroom door, cell phone in hand, an incredulous expression. "Joanna, you need to see this. You are everywhere. There are even news channels talking about you." And she was. Morning programs debated the video, discussing social inequality, treatment of employees, abuse of power. Digital influencers shared it with messages of support. Feminist groups celebrated the courage. In a matter of hours, Joanna Silva had stopped being just an unemployed cleaning lady and became a symbol of resistance against oppression. But not all attention was good. On the second day, the messages started. Some of support, offering donations, jobs, help. Others were very different. Veiled threats, comments about where she lived, about her daughter. People saying she would pay for having disrespected Helena Vasconcelos, that she didn't know who she was messing with. Joanna had to deactivate her social networks. She stopped leaving the house, afraid of being recognized. Isabella didn't understand why her mother was on everyone's cell phones, why Donna Celia wouldn't let her talk about it at school. And then came the part Joanna feared most. She started looking for a job. She sent resumes to dozens of places, restaurants, hotels, offices, anything. She had a few interviews in the first few days, and they all followed the same pattern. The interviewer would start normally, asking standard questions. Then came the recognition. "You're that girl from the video, aren't you?" Joanna had learned to be honest. Yes, it was her. And then she saw the change, the enthusiasm cooling, excuses arising. "We'll call you. We need to evaluate more candidates. The process isn't finalized yet." But the call never came. After 2 weeks, she understood. Helena Vasconcelos hadn't needed to do anything directly. The simple fact that Joanna was associated with that confrontation, of having gone viral for challenging someone so powerful, was enough. Companies were afraid. Afraid of retaliation, afraid of negative association, afraid that hiring Joanna would mean problems they weren't willing to face. An invisible line had been crossed, and on the other side, Joanna was discovering that courage had a price. It was on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after her dismissal, that the letter arrived. It was simple, in a high-quality paper envelope with no sender. Inside, just a card with an elegant address in Jardins and a time set for the next day. At the bottom, a signature Joanna recognized immediately, Helena Vasconcelos. Donna Celia saw the expression on her daughter's face when she finished reading. "What is it?" Joanna showed the card, still processing. Her mother frowned, worried. "You're not going, are you?" Joanna looked at the card, at the address written in perfect calligraphy. She thought of Isabella at school, of the unanswered resumes, of the bills starting to pile up. She thought of dignity and survival, of principles and pragmatism. "I am," she said finally. "I need to know what she wants. And if it's a trap?" Joanna laughed without humor. "Mom, my life is already a trap. What can she do that hasn't already been done?" But both knew that was a dangerous question, because Helena Vasconcelos, with all her power and her connections, could do much more than Joanna was prepared to face. Or perhaps, and this was a possibility Joanna barely dared to consider, that meeting represented something completely different. A chance, a change, a door opening when all others had closed. The next morning, Joanna woke up early. She chose her best clothes, simple but clean and well-pressed. She kissed Isabella while she was still sleeping, hugged her mother, who tried to hide her concern. She took 2 buses and a subway to get to Jardins, to the address indicated on the card. The building was imposing, all in mirrored glass and steel. The reception looked like a 5-star hotel lobby. Joanna gave her name, and the receptionist, after a quick call, pointed to the elevator. 25th floor. Joanna entered the elevator with her heart beating fast. The doors closed and she began to rise toward a meeting that would change everything. Again. Helena Vasconcelos' office occupied the entire 25th floor and had a panoramic view of São Paulo that took one's breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city stretching in all directions, a sea of concrete, glass, and pulsing life. Joanna had never seen the city from that angle, never imagined it was possible to be so far above everything, and yet so close. The secretary, a middle-aged woman with impeccable posture and a perfectly cut grey suit, led Joanna through a corridor decorated with contemporary art that probably cost more than her entire house. They stopped in front of a double, dark wood door. "Mrs. Vasconcelos is waiting. Enter, please." Joanna took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The inner office was at once immense and surprisingly personal. There was the mandatory executive desk, bookshelves filled with books and documents, paintings on the walls. But there were also small human touches, framed photos, a knitted blanket thrown over an armchair, a plant that needed water. Helena was standing by the window, looking out at the city. She wore a beige pantsuit, elegant but less formal than her restaurant attire. Her hair was loose, falling over her shoulders in dark waves. When she turned to face Joanna, there was something different in her face. The coldness was still there, but accompanied by something else. Tiredness? Curiosity? Joanna couldn't identify it. "Thank you for coming." The voice was the same, controlled and clear, but without the cutting tone Joanna had grown accustomed to fearing. She nodded, not trusting her own voice yet. "Sit down, please." Helena pointed to 2 armchairs positioned near the window, not the executive desk. It was a small but significant gesture, a choice of where to situate that conversation. Joanna sat on the edge of the armchair, hands folded in her lap, still not understanding what she was doing there. Helena sat in the opposite armchair, crossing her legs with automatic elegance. For a long moment she just looked at Joanna, studying her with that intensity that seemed to penetrate layers of defense. "I imagine you're wondering why I called you here." "I am." Joanna's answer came out firmer than she expected. Helena sketched something that could have been the beginning of a smile, but it disappeared too fast to be sure. I'll be direct because I imagine you value that. I watched the video, not once, several times. I read the comments, the analyses, the opinions of strangers about who I am and what I do. It was enlightening. Joanna said nothing, waiting. She had learned that sometimes silence revealed more than words. You told me things that no one has ever had the courage to say, and you were right in every word. I treat people with contempt. I use my position to diminish others, and I do it because I always could, because no one ever stopped me. The admission was shocking in its frankness. Joanna had expected denial, justifications, perhaps veiled threats. Not this raw honesty. Why are you telling me this? Because I need someone like you. Like me? Someone who isn't afraid to tell me the truth. Someone who isn't impressed by my money or my influence. Someone who cares more about what is right than what is convenient. Helena stood up, walking to the window. Joanna watched her, noticing for the first time the tension in the woman's shoulders, the way her fingers drummed nervously against her thigh. I'm 42 years old, Joanna. I built an empire alongside my husband. I am respected, feared, but I am not loved. I am not admired. And recently, I started to wonder if that matters, if in the end, when I look back, I'm going to be proud of the legacy I left. She turned, facing Joanna again. And then you appeared, a cleaning lady who risked everything to tell me truths I needed to hear, and I realized that if I want to change, if I really want to be different from who I've always been, I need someone to keep me honest, someone who won't let me slip back into old habits. Joanna processed the words slowly, trying to find the trap, the hidden blow. But if it existed, it was well disguised. What exactly are you proposing? I want you to work for me, as my personal assistant, not to serve coffee or organize schedules. I want you to be my conscience, to question me when I'm being cruel, to remind me of the impact of my words and actions, to help me be better. And why would I accept that, after everything you did to me? Because I'm offering a salary 3 times higher than what you earned at the restaurant, because I'm offering the chance to make a real difference, and because, Joanna, we both know you're out of options. No one in the city will hire you after that video. I made sure of that. The last sentence was said without malice, just as a statement of fact. Joanna felt anger rise but forced herself to stay calm. So you destroyed my reputation on purpose, to force me to accept this proposal? No, I destroyed your reputation because it's what I do when I feel threatened. It's my pattern, my reflex. But then I realized there was another way, a better one. That's why I'm here, making this offer. Joanna stood up, needing space to think. She walked to the window, looking at the city below. She thought of Isabella, of the bills piling up, of Donna Celia working double shifts to help. She thought of dignity and pragmatism, of ideals and reality. And if I say no, then you are free to look for another job. I will make calls, I will open doors, I will undo the damage I caused, but I won't have you by my side to help me change. Helena approached, standing beside Joanna at the window. The two women, so different and yet so similar in their stubbornness, looked at the city together. I'm not asking you to trust me. I know I have no right to that, but I'm asking for a chance for both of us. Joanna closed her eyes, breathing deeply. She knew that could be a monumental mistake. She knew Helena could be manipulating her, that the promised change could be just a facade, but she also knew that this was an opportunity that wouldn't come back. And if I accept, I do it my way. No filters, no phoniness. If I see you treating someone poorly, I'm going to speak up. If I disagree with a decision, I'm going to question it. I'm not going to be just another employee who says yes to everything. I wouldn't expect anything less. I need guarantees, a formal contract, a fair termination clause, and I want everything in writing about you opening the doors you closed for me. It's already prepared. Helena pointed to a folder on the desk. I had my lawyers draw it up, read it calmly, show it to a lawyer you trust if you want. There are no tricks. Joanna picked up the folder, flipping through the documents. There were dozens of pages of legalese, but the main numbers were clear. The salary was indeed 3 times higher. The benefits were generous. The conditions on the surface seemed fair. I'm going to need time to think. You have until Monday. Today is Thursday. Use the weekend. Talk to your family. Decide if you can do this. Joanna nodded, putting the folder in her bag. As she turned to leave, Helena's voice stopped her. Joanna! That night at the restaurant, when you said those things, you were shaking but your voice didn't waver. How did you do it? Joanna thought for a moment, searching for the honest answer. Because there was something bigger at stake than my fear. There was dignity, mine and that of everyone you treated that way before me. Helena nodded slowly, as if that answer confirmed something she already suspected. That's why I need you. The weekend was a torture of indecision. Donna Celia had a divided opinion. On one hand, she saw the financial opportunity. On the other, she feared for her daughter's emotional well-being. Isabella, in the innocence of her 7 years, thought her mother working in such a beautiful building was wonderful. Joanna made lists of pros and cons. She talked to former colleagues, researched Helena on the internet, tried to find some angle she hadn't considered. In the end, the decision came down to a simple question. Did she believe in second chances? On Monday morning, Joanna returned to the building in Jardins. She went up to the 25th floor with the folder in her bag and a decision made. Helena received her in the same office, wearing a meticulous grey outfit, her hair tied back, her imperial posture back. But there was something in her eyes, a poorly disguised expectation. I accept on conditions. Tell me. The first month is a trial period, for both of us. If it doesn't work, I leave without resentment and you keep your promise to open the doors you closed. If it works, we continue with the full contract. Helena reached out her hand. Accepted. The handshake was firm on both sides. In that moment, something changed in the air between them. It wasn't trust yet, it wasn't friendship, but it was the beginning of something, a tacit agreement that both would enter into this for real. And so began the strangest phase of Joanna Silva's life. In the first few days, everything was uncomfortable. Helena had decades of ingrained habits, automatic ways of dealing with employees, with subordinates, with anyone she considered below her. Joanna saw these moments happen in real time. An impatient word with the secretary, a cutting comment about a report, an unnecessary coldness with a supplier on the phone. And each time Joanna intervened, at first with hesitation, then with more firmness. Helena, can you rephrase that? There's a better way to say the same thing. The secretary has worked here for 15 years. She deserves more respect than that. Helena's first reactions were defensive. Irritation, icy stares, that posture of someone who isn't used to being questioned. But she would hold her tongue, breathe deeply, try again. The effort was visible, the discomfort of breaking patterns of an entire lifetime. There were relapses, of course, moments when the old Helena emerged with full force, especially under pressure or stress. Joanna learned to recognize the signs, to intervene before the damage was done, and slowly, very slowly, changes began to appear, small ones at first. Helena thanking the secretary for a job well done, asking for opinions instead of just giving orders, asking questions about employees' personal lives, showing genuine interest. But the real transformation was still to come, and it would come in ways that neither of them could predict. The third month of Joanna's work alongside Helena began with a crisis that would test everything they had built so far. It was a Tuesday morning when the secretary Beatrice entered the office with a tense expression. Joanna had already learned to read the signs. Beatrice was an experienced professional who rarely showed nervousness, but at that moment her hands trembled slightly as she handed a folder to Helena. Mrs. Vasconcelos, we have a problem. The quarterly report for the Southern Division has serious errors. Inflated numbers, unrealistic projections. If we present this to the board tomorrow, it will be a disaster. Helena took the folder, her eyes scanning the pages with impressive speed. Joanna saw the changes happening in her face, her jaw tightening, her eyes narrowing, that expression she already knew well. It was the old Helena emerging, the woman who solved problems with brutal authority and little consideration for anyone who got in the way. Who is responsible for this? Helena's voice came out sharp as a blade. Fernando Almeida, the regional manager. Beatriz hesitated. He's going through a difficult time. His mother is sick. He's been missing a lot of work. I'm not interested in his personal life. I'm interested in competence. Joanna, schedule a meeting with Fernando for this afternoon. I'm going to... Helena. Joanna's voice was soft but firm. Helena stopped mid-sentence, her eyes turning toward her. For a terrifying second, Joanna saw the struggle happening there, the internal battle between the old reflex and the new path she was trying to tread. "Can we talk for a moment?" Joanna looked at Beatrice. "Excuse us, Beatrice." The secretary left quickly, clearly relieved to escape the line of fire. When the door closed, Joanna turned to Helena. "You were about to destroy a man who is going through a difficult time, without even hearing his side. He made a mistake that could cost millions." "Yes, and mistakes have consequences. But you hired me to remind you to think about people, not just numbers. So let's do that. Let's hear what Fernando has to say before deciding anything." Helena closed her eyes, breathing deeply. When she opened them again, there was frustration there, but also something like reluctant gratitude. "You're right. Schedule the meeting, but as a conversation, not an execution." The meeting with Fernando took place in the middle of the afternoon. The man in his 50s entered the office visibly shaken, shoulders hunched, deep dark circles marking a face that had probably been younger before circumstances aged him. Joanna observed Helena making a conscious effort to soften her posture, to sit in a less intimidating way. "Fernando, thank you for coming." Helena pointed to the armchairs, not the executive desk. "We need to talk about the quarterly report." The man nodded, nervous hands in his lap. "I know, it's full of errors. I have no excuse, Mrs. Vasconcelos. I know I failed. Tell me what is happening, for real." And then, with a voice that grew weaker as he spoke, Fernando told her. His mother with advanced Alzheimer's, the impossibility of paying for a full-time caregiver, sleepless nights, days divided between work and the hospital. The report had been made in stolen pieces of time, between doctor visits and emergency calls, and he knew it was bad but hadn't been able to do better. Helena listened to everything in silence. Joanna saw the transformation happen in real time, the coldness giving way to something more human, more real. When Fernando finished, Helena was quiet for a long moment. "Fernando, how long have you worked here?" 15 years, ma'am. "And in those 15 years, how many times did you disappoint me before this?" The man thought sincerely. "Never, I think. I always tried to give my best." Helena nodded, looking at Joanna briefly before returning her attention to Fernando. "Then I'll tell you what we're going to do. You're going to take 2 weeks of paid leave. In that time, you're going to take care of your mother. You're going to sleep. You're going to get organized. The company is going to help you hire a specialized caregiver. When you return, we'll discuss how to restructure your workload so you can balance professional and family responsibilities. Meanwhile, I'll have someone else redo the report. No punishments, no judgments." Fernando blinked, clearly expecting a dismissal or at least a severe warning. "I don't know what to say." "Say you're going to take care of your mother. And Fernando, next time you're overwhelmed, ask for help before it becomes a crisis. Are we understood?" "Yes, ma'am, thank you very much." When Fernando left, visibly emotional, Helena remained seated in silence. Joanna waited, knowing she needed to process what she had just done. Finally, Helena spoke. "6 months ago, I would have fired Fernando on the spot. I would have used it as an example to show that incompetence is not tolerated. And do you know what I would have achieved with that?" "What?" "Probably a loyal employee turned into an enemy, a destroyed family, and an even worse reputation than I already have. But I wouldn't have solved the real problem, only punished someone for being in a difficult situation." Joanna felt something tighten in her chest. It was pride, she realized. Pride in Helena, pride in the progress they had made together. "You did the right thing." "I did what you would have done." Helena smiled, and it was a real smile, not the social mask she usually wore. "I'm learning. Slowly, but I am." But the journey was far from linear. 2 weeks later, during a tense board meeting, the old Helena resurfaced with full force. One of the directors had questioned one of her decisions, and Helena's response had been brutal, public, calculated to humiliate. Joanna was present, watching from a corner of the room. She saw the transformation happen, saw Helena return to that version of herself that commanded through fear, and for the first time, she decided to intervene publicly. "Excuse me." Joanna's voice cut through the room, making all eyes turn to her. "Mrs. Vasconcelos, can we have a moment in private?" The silence in the room was deafening. No one interrupted Helena Vasconcelos in the middle of a board meeting. No one. Joanna saw the anger pass through Helena's eyes, saw the internal war happen. For a terrifying second, she thought Helena was going to refuse, that she was going to explode right there. But then something changed. Helena breathed deeply, nodded. 5-minute break. In the corridor, away from the eyes and ears of the board, Helena turned to Joanna with a furious expression. You made me look weak in there. I stopped you from doing something you were going to regret. That director asked a legitimate question. You attacked him personally? He challenged me. He did his job, Helena. You asked me to keep you on the right path. That's what I'm doing. But if you want to go back to being who you were before, just say so. I'll pack my things and leave. Helena recoiled as if she had been slapped. The anger in her eyes gave way to something more complex. Fear, vulnerability. I don't want you to leave. Helena ran her hand over her face, suddenly looking tired. It's so hard, Joanna. 42 years of doing things one way, and now trying to change everything. Sometimes the old me just takes control before I realize it. I know, and that's why I'm here. To remind you when that happens. But you need to let me do it, even when it hurts, even when it's uncomfortable. Helena nodded slowly. You're right. I'm going back in there and apologizing. And that was exactly what she did. She went back into the boardroom, admitted she had overreacted, and apologized publicly to the director. The expression of shock on the faces around the table would have been comical in other circumstances. But it was from that moment on that something fundamental changed. News of Helena's transformation began to spread. Employees who had worked in fear began to notice real differences. Meetings became collaborative instead of authoritarian monologues. Feedback was requested and valued. Errors were treated as learning opportunities, not capital crimes. Joanna was also changing. Constant work alongside Helena exposed her to a world she had never imagined accessing. She participated in strategic meetings, contributing perspectives that people at that level rarely considered. She discovered she had a knack for seeing things others didn't, for understanding human dynamics that went unnoticed by executives focused only on numbers. One night, working late at the office, the two women found themselves alone for the first time in weeks. Helena was hunched over reports, Joanna reviewing schedules. Suddenly, Helena spoke. Can I ask you a personal question? Joanna looked up. You can. Why did you accept this proposal? Truly, don't tell me it was just for the money. Joanna thought for a long moment, searching for the honesty her position there demanded. Because I believe people can change, because my daughter needs to see that courage has a reward even when it takes time, and because, if I'm honest, part of me wanted to prove you wrong. Wrong about what? About people like me being inferior, about power and money being the only thing that matters, about treatment based on fear being effective. I wanted to prove there is another way. And did you prove it? Joanna smiled. Not yet, but we're getting there. Helena laughed, and it was a real laugh without artifice. You know, Joanna, when I saw you at that restaurant for the first time in decades, I felt fear. Real fear of another person, not physical fear, but fear of what your words meant. Fear of looking in the mirror and seeing who I really was. And what did you see? Someone who needed to change, and someone who needed help to do it. The silence that followed was comfortable, companionable. Two women from completely different worlds, united by a common purpose. It wasn't friendship yet. Maybe it never would be. But it was something real, something that mattered. And it was only the beginning of the true transformation that was yet to come. 6 months had passed since Joanna had accepted Helena's proposal. On that Saturday morning, she was in the office helping organize the final details of an event that had become Helena's most personal project since she began her transformation. The Vasconcelos Institute for Professional Development would open the following week. It was a training and qualification center for people in situations of social vulnerability, offering free courses, mentoring, and connections with partner companies. The idea had been born from a conversation between Helena and Joanna 3 months earlier about how to use power and resources to create real change. But what made that project truly special wasn't just its existence, but the process that had led there. Helena hadn't simply signed checks and delegated responsibilities. She had been present at every stage, listening to stories, meeting future students, understanding real needs. For the first time in her life, she had set her ego aside and learned from people she would have previously considered unworthy of her attention. The office door opened and Helena entered, bringing coffee and cheese bread still warm from a bakery she had discovered on her last visit to the Institute's site, located in Itaquera, not coincidentally near Joanna's house. I thought we'd need fuel. Helena placed the packages on the table, smiling. And before you ask, yes, I went to the bakery myself. I talked to Donna Marlene. She's going to supply the bread for the Institute's cafeteria. Joanna took a warm bread, feeling its comforting aroma. You've changed, Helena, truly. Sometimes I still catch myself having the same old thoughts. Helena sat down, taking her coffee. Yesterday in traffic, a motorcycle courier almost hit my car. My first impulse was to tell my driver to get out and give him a lecture. And then I remembered you, everything we talked about, and I thought, maybe he's late for a delivery, maybe he needs that job desperately, maybe he's having a bad day. I took a deep breath and let it go. It's a process. You're not going to change decades of habits in months. But I am changing. And do you know how I know? Last night Rodrigo made a comment that made me think. He said he didn't recognize me anymore, but not in a negative way. He said I seemed lighter, and I realized he was right. I spent my whole life carrying a weight I created myself, this need to control everything, to be feared. And now, little by little, I'm learning to let go. Joanna's phone vibrated. It was a message from Isabella, now 8 years old, asking if her mother would be home in time for Sunday lunch at her grandmother's house. Joanna smiled, replying that she would. How is Isabella? Growing too fast. Last week she asked me about the video. A classmate at school had seen it. And what did you say? I told her the truth, that sometimes we need to have the courage to do what is right even when it's difficult, and that this can change everything. Helena was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the city below. Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? Of course. When I was Isabella's age, my father took me to his office. He was a hard man, authoritarian, the type who believed kindness was weakness. That day I saw him humiliate an employee until the man cried, and later, on the way home, he told me, "That's how you maintain control, Helena. Never let them see you as weak. Never let yourself be carried away by feelings." And I, being a girl, absorbed that as absolute truth. I spent my whole life trying to be like him. And now I realize my father was wrong. That what he called strength was just cruelty in disguise. That true power doesn't come from making people fear you, but from inspiring them to be better. And that it's never too late to choose a different path. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Beatrice, the secretary, who brought documents for signature. Joanna observed the interaction between the two women, noticing something that had become common but never ceased to surprise her. Helena asked about Beatrice's son, who was recovering from surgery. They talked for a few minutes, and when Beatrice left, there was a genuine smile on her face. "She trusts you now," Joanna commented. "Beatrice, in the beginning she was afraid just to enter the room." Helena nodded thoughtfully. "Trust is something built slowly and destroyed quickly. I'm learning to value that, and Joanna, without you here I would have gone back to my old habits a long time ago. You are my anchor. You are the one doing the work. I'm just reminding you why." The following days were a rush of final preparations for the inauguration. Helena insisted that Joanna be one of the speakers at the event, and although reluctant at first, Joanna agreed. She had a story to tell, a story that could inspire others to find their own courage. The morning of the inauguration dawned clear and sunny. The Institute building, renovated and painted in cheerful tones, was full of people. Future students, partners, press, local authorities, and in the middle of everyone, Helena Vasconcelos, no longer the feared and distant figure, but someone who talked, listened, connected. When it was her turn to speak, Helena went up on stage with a different confidence than she had always shown. It wasn't the arrogance of someone who knew she was superior, but the confidence of someone who had found purpose. "A year ago I was a very different person," Helena began, her clear voice echoing through the hall. "I was someone who believed that power meant control, that respect came from fear, that people were resources to be managed, not human beings to be valued. And then, one night in a restaurant, someone had the courage to tell me the truth. Someone who had nothing to gain and everything to lose, but who spoke up anyway." She paused, looking for Joanna in the audience. When their eyes met, Helena smiled. "Joanna Silva gave me the most valuable gift anyone has ever given me. She gave me a mirror, and when I finally looked at my own reflection, I didn't like what I saw. This institute exists because from that moment on, I decided to change. It wasn't easy. It wasn't fast, and it's still a work in progress, but every day I try to be a little better than I was the day before. The applause was spontaneous and warm, but Helena raised her hand asking for silence. Many people here will benefit from the programs we offer. They will learn new skills, make connections, have opportunities that might have seemed impossible. But I want you to understand something fundamental. You are not charity projects. You are people with stories, dreams, talents, and I, like everyone involved in this institute, am here to support you, not to save you. Because the truth is that often you are the ones who save us. You remind us of what really matters. You teach us about resilience, courage, dignity. When Joanna went up on stage minutes later, her hands were shaking slightly. But when she began to speak about that night in the restaurant, about the decision to accept Helena's proposal, about the journey that had brought them there, her voice was firm and clear. Change is possible. That's what I've learned in these months. No matter how many years you've lived one way, there's always room to choose another path. And sometimes, the greatest courage isn't in facing those who have power over you, but in accepting that all of us, regardless of position or wealth, are just human beings trying to get it right. At the end of the event, when the crowd began to disperse, Helena and Joanna stood side by side watching the future students exploring the facilities, talking excitedly about the possibilities opening up. Rodrigo approached, placing his hand on his wife's shoulder with a tenderness Joanna had rarely seen between them. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. Helena held her husband's hand, then looked at Joanna. "I couldn't have done it without help, and I'm learning that accepting help isn't weakness, it's wisdom." Weeks later, Joanna was at home helping Isabella with her school homework when she received a call from Helena. It was unusual for them to receive personal calls. They normally maintained communication only during working hours. "Joanna, I need to tell you something." Helena's voice had a rare emotion. "Remember Fernando Almeida, the manager who was taking care of his mother?" "I remember. How is he?" "His mother passed away last week. He returned to work today. And do you know what he did? He came to my office not to ask for more time or talk about work. He came to thank me. He said he will never forget that when he needed it most, he found humanity where he expected only judgment. He said it made all the difference in the last months of his mother's life." Helena paused, and Joanna heard the emotion in her voice. "I cried, Joanna. I cried right there in front of him. For the first time in decades, I let someone see me vulnerable. And do you know what happened? Nothing bad. The world didn't collapse. I didn't lose his respect. If anything, I think I gained more." Joanna smiled, feeling her own eyes fill with tears. "You made it, Helena, you really did." "We made it," Helena corrected softly. "This was never just about me, it was about what we can build together." And so, in the midst of a city that never stopped, two women who should have remained in separate worlds found something that transcended differences of class, education, and origin. They found shared purpose, mutual respect, and living proof that real transformation is possible. The Vasconcelos Institute thrived. In the following months, hundreds of people passed through its programs, finding not only professional qualification, but also dignity and hope. And in every success story, in every life transformed, echoed the truth that Joanna had pronounced that night in the restaurant. That power without humanity is empty, that wealth without compassion is poverty, and that the greatest change we can make in the world begins with the change we make in ourselves. Helena never went back to being the woman she was before. She had occasional relapses, moments when old instincts tried to resurface. But now she had tools to recognize and correct them. And more importantly, she had people by her side who kept her honest, who constantly reminded her of who she had chosen to become. Joanna, for her part, had discovered that that courageous act in a restaurant hadn't just been about facing Helena. It had been about facing her own limitations, about believing she had a voice and value. And now, as a fundamental part of the Institute and a respected voice in the company, she was creating paths for other people like her to also find their own voices. Isabella grew up seeing her mother not just as someone who worked hard, but as someone who had made a real difference in the world. And that was the most valuable heritage Joanna could leave. On an ordinary afternoon, Months after the inauguration, Helena and Joanna were reviewing proposals to expand the institute when Helena stopped, looking out the window. "Sometimes I still think about that night," Helena said softly, "about how everything could have been different if you hadn't had the courage to speak." Joanna thought for a moment. "And sometimes I think about how everything could be different if you hadn't had the courage to listen. The courage to speak is important, but the courage to change when confronted with the truth is equally rare." Helena smiled, and it was a smile full of gratitude and genuine affection. "Thank you, Joanna, for everything." "Thank you, Helena, for proving it's never too late to choose to be better." And there, on the 25th floor of a building in Sao Paulo, two women who started as antagonists ended as something much more precious. Not exactly friends, not in the traditional sense, but partners in a journey that had changed, both in ways they could never have imagined. The story of Helena and Joanna became an example. It was told in lectures, inspired other companies, opened conversations about humanity in the corporate world. But more important than all that, it transformed lives, one at a time, one gesture at a time, one choice at a time. Because in the end, real change doesn't happen in big dramatic gestures, although those have their place. It happens in the small daily moments where we choose kindness instead of cruelty, understanding instead of judgment, humanity instead of power. And that choice, Helena and Joanna proved, is always available. It doesn't matter who you were, it only matters who you choose to be from now on. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Helena and Joanna touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of transformation and courage, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what marked you the most. Every day we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul and remind us that change is always